Your what's good, y'all? It's your host, the one and only Dad Poppy, aka Los Courtside, back again with another video. So, I bet you guys wondering what the video is about today. I want to be able to impart some knowledge on this channel. I feel like that's a good way to give back to the community. As a young man growing up, I've encountered a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. And with that happening, I've encountered a lot of different arguments, especially in the relationship category. When you get into relationships with different people, a lot of the times at a certain point you're going to argue. That's just the human nature of things. One thing that I wish that I I wish that I knew earlier was a little thing called a logical fallacy. Now you might be asking, Los, what the fuck is a logical fallacy? Why don't you calm the hell down, stop that profanity, because I'm going to break it down for you in this video so that you can be on the lookout for when you're in arguments with different people, whether that's your significant other, whether or not it's a troll with somebody on Twitter or in the comment section. You can understand the tactics that they're using so that you can stop yourself in the tracks of engaging in that argument, or you can hit them like Zorro, cut the entire logical fallacy apart, and get straight to their jugular so that you can make your point and you can come out on top. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So what is a logical fallacy? We already have the website pulled up right here, thebestschools.org, and they got 15 logical fallacies. And no, I'm gonna go through them and I'm trying to give an example from my personal life or something that I feel like you would more so understand so that it'll better be digested and heard. So logical fallacies are flawed, deceptive, or false arguments that can be proven wrong with reasoning. There are two types of fallacies. A formal fallacy is an argument with a premise and a conclusion that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Well, so what does that mean exactly? So basically, formal fallacy is saying something that it sounds right until you start to look into the details, until you start picking it apart, and then it comes out to say, that actually doesn't make any sense at all. For instance, an example like that would be, I'm cold when it snows, so I wear a jacket. When I wear a jacket, it snows. These two things are not in line with each other. Just because you wear a jacket does not mean it snows. And just because it's cold doesn't mean you wear a jacket. They are interrelated with each other, but they are completely separate. Now, if you were to just say it real quick and say, yeah, when it's cold, when it snows, I wear a jacket. I wear a jacket where it snows. Yeah, that's 100% sounds right until you bring it into the context of, well, how does that work in the argument that you're actually trying to sell? An informal fallacy is the second type, and that's an error in the form, content, or context of the argument. So that's basically like information that's not 100% correct, but you're using some type of fact incorrectly or using some type of phrasing or word incorrectly. Maybe you're referencing a Bible quote and you're not understanding the context of the Bible quote, which a lot of people use a lot of the time, in which they say, oh, the Bible says this and the Bible says that, but they don't understand the context of which that quote, that sentence, that verse is even referencing, to the point where you're bastardizing what is actually the meaning of the verse. So let's get into the 15 types of logical fallacies. So the first one is the ad hominem. An ad hominem fallacy uses personal attacks rather than logic. This fallacy occurs when someone rejects or criticizes another point of view based on the personal characteristics, ethnic background, physical appearance, or other non-relevant traits of the person who holds it. Ad hominem arguments are often used in politics, where they are often called mudslinging. They are considered unethical because politicians can use them to manipulate voters' opinion against an opponent without addressing core issues. So they already have a couple of examples right here, in which I don't really understand either of them. So I'm going to bring a better, more pertinent example to the case. For instance, a lot of the time when you're in an argument with a woman, the first thing they gonna do when they don't have a point, when you have the upper hand, they're gonna attack your character in some way. They could do this by calling you gay, which is what a lot of women do. That's one of the main ones. Call you ugly, they'll call you dusty, they'll call you dirty, they'll call you broke. These are the first type of ad hominem that you get a lot of time when you get into arguments online and when you get into arguments with women. They are not trying to debate the topic anymore. They usually understand that their point is already, and that there's nothing that they can do about their point being lost. So they're just gonna attack you now. They're gonna try to win over the crowd. They're going to try to distract you from the fact that their point doesn't make any sense. So they're gonna disrespect you. They're going to insinuate things about you. They're going to try to tear down your image so that anything that you say, even if it's logical, even if it makes sense, even if you are in the right, people aren't going to respect it. People aren't going to take it in because they're attacking your character. Now we have a straw man, which I feel like a lot of people should know. Straw man argument attacks a different subject rather than the topic being discussed, often a more extreme version of the counter argument. The purpose of this misdirection is to make one's position look stronger than it actually is. Straw man argument is appropriately named after a harmless, lifeless scarecrow. Instead of the contending with the actual argument, they attack the equivalent of a lifeless bundle of straw and easily defeat a puppet that the opponent was never arguing for in the first place. So let's see if we can detect the following statements for which one is a straw man. So the example one is the senator thinks we can solve all of our ecological problems by driving a Prius. Example two, quite the contrary, the senator thinks the environment is such a wreck that no one's car choice or driving habits would make the slightest difference. Now, I'm gonna give you 3 seconds to pick which one you think it is. And it's example two. Now, why is example two the straw man? Well, let's look at it. They're taking an egregious statement by saying that the environment is such a wreck that no one's car choice or driving habits would make the slightest difference. That's such a big statement, and it's not backed up by any facts, and it's not backed up by any numbers or statistics or anything like that. But it's hoping that by saying, well, the environment is a wreck, which is something that most people would be able to agree on because with common knowledge of how the environment is, you know that with pollution and whatnot, that you could quote unquote say it's a wreck, but you still need numbers, you still need facts and evidence to further back up and support your claim. A lot of times people use big statements in order to persuade their issue at hand and to gloss over the finer details because then if you were to bring the finer details into it, a lot of the times it would complicate and it would make it harder for them to prove their point. There's so many instances of strawmen that we see in today's society a lot of the time. I want to think of an argument of in a relationship what that might look like in a toxic relationship what a straw man might look like. So maybe a straw man would be something like, I don't like that you come home late from work. Right? That's fair. That's an understandable argument to have. And then say that you coming home late for work means that you're cheating. Now you can see how this is a straw man of, whoa, wait a second. You took a statement of which it was a behavior that you might not have agreed with or you had found some fault with or you just didn't like, and now you're trying to conflate that with something completely ridiculous or something inflammatory to the point where now you're indirectly accusing me of doing something just because of the fact that I come home late from work. So that's an example that we can use. Let's go on to the next one. The next one is an appeal to ignorance, also known as an argument from ignorance. It argues that a proposition must be true. It has not been proven false, or there is no evidence against it. The argument can be used to bolster multiple contradictory conclusions at once, such as the following two claims. No one has ever been able to prove that extraterrestrials exist, so they must not be real. No one has ever been able to prove that extraterrestrials do not exist, so they must be real. An appeal to ignorance doesn't prove anything, instead it shifts the need to proof away from the person making the claim. Now, you're going to see this a lot of the times in which you're going after your opponent is going after something subjective, and they're using an appeal to ignorance to say, hey, we haven't been able to prove this or prove that it does work or prove that it doesn't work, so we can just chalk it up to say that it does work. And now they're trying to put the blame back on you. Well, not the blame, they're trying to put the onus on you. They're trying to put the burden of proving the fact for the argument on you, instead of coming with evidence, instead of coming with facts of their own, because they don't have it. And so they'd rather you do the work for them, you do the extra work to try to either bolster their claim or for you to tear it down. But most of the time with these type of statements, you can't really even have a conversation of good faith, because what is that really saying? No one has ever been able to prove that extraterrestrials exist, so they must not be real. But where's the evidence? Where's the facts? Like, yes, we haven't been able to prove that yet, but what did the study say so far? What has been already placed to lead up to it for us to say this thing? And then they have the examples. Example number one, we have no evidence that the Illuminati ever existed. They must have been so clever that they destroyed all the evidence. And then number two, I know nothing about Tank Johnson except he has a criminal record as long as your leg. But I'll bet he's really just misunderstood. So the appeal to ignorance is going to be the one about the Illuminati. We can't say that Illuminati exists just because we can't prove. This is what a lot of conspiracy theorists end up doing, is that because you can't prove it or you can't prove it against it, that it must be real. That's not the case, because we don't have the evidence to back it up at the end of the day. And they're always going to put the onus on you to say, well, you prove it. And you know that you can't because there's not enough evidence. But they also can't prove it for themselves that it exists as well either. So that's an appeal to ignorance. Our next one is a false dilemma, false dichotomy. False dilemma or false dichotomy presents limited options, typically by focusing on two extremes. So in fact, more possibilities exist. The phrase "America, love it or leave it" is an example of a false dilemma. The false dilemma fallacy is a manipulative tool designed to polarize the audience, promoting one side and demonizing another. It's common in political discourse as a way of strong arming the public into supporting controversial legalization or policies. So let's see if we can find out the which one is the false dilemma in these two examples. So number one is either we go to war or we appear weak. And then example two is either you love me or you hate me. Now the false dilemma is going to be example number one, because of the fact that just because you go to war, you don't go to war, it doesn't mean that you're weak. There's so many more ways that you could look at it. You could not go to war because you want to preserve peace. You could not want to go to war because of the bloodshed that comes into it, and the cost of going to war is not worth going and engaging in war. Whereas, for example, two, either you love me or you hate me. This is one of those things where that's not also not the case. Either you love me or you hate me. That's You could love somebody, you could be indifferent, you could not care about anything about them or what they got going on. This happens a lot in controversial, blah, 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 I misspoke, in toxic relationships, in which somebody says, if you love me, you would do this for me. If you love me, you would buy me this. If you loved me, you would take this away. If you loved me, you would do whatever. And that's not the case, but it's a manipulation tactic to try to get you under control, to try to bring you in and to force you into doing their options, giving you two choices and saying that these are the only two options that you have, when that's never the case. You always have more options. There's always another route that you could take if you're creative, if you use your brain, if you understand all of everything that goes into what's going on right now. But people are going to try to make you and force you to think that there's only two options, so that you are more persuaded to go to their side. So if you ever notice something like that, if you ever hear a statement like that, understand that they're trying to manipulate you to take a step back and then say, hey, I got my options. You're tripping. The next logical fallacy is a slippery slope. Slippery slope argument assumes that a certain course of action will necessarily lead to a chain of future events. The slippery slope fallacy takes a benign premise or starting point and suggests that it will lead to unlikely or ridiculous outcomes with no supporting evidence. You may have used this fallacy on your parents as a teenager, but you have to let me go to the party. If I don't go to the party, I'll be a loser with my friends. Next thing you know, I'll end up alone and jobless, living in your basement when I'm 30, which is, over exaggerating to the nth degree. So let's look at the examples. Which of the examples is slippery slope and which is not? Your coach's policy is that no one can be a starter on game day if they miss practice. So if you miss practice today, you won't in Friday's game. Then you won't be the best fresh. You won't be the first freshman to start on the varsity basketball team at our school. And then the second one is if you miss practice, it means you were probably goofing off. People who goof off drop out of school and end up penniless. Now, the slippery slope is the second one because it goes from if you miss practice, you're gonna goof off. It makes the assumption that if you miss practice, all of a sudden what you're going to do. A slippery slope. They add a lot of assumptions, and which is where the bullshit comes in because you're basically trying to guess things, and usually you're trying to guess the worst case scenario or the best case scenario for whatever is about to unfold to strengthen your argument. So for them to say if you miss practice, it means you're probably goofing off. And people who goof off, drop out of school and end up penniless. Uh, you you don't get that from missing practice. Tons of people miss practice, tons of people miss work, and they don't goof off, or they do goof off, and that doesn't mean that they're gonna end up penniless. That's something that a lot of people use for the extremes. I would say an example of this in a relationship would be your girl telling you you can't go out tonight with your friends. You can't go out to the club. If you go out to the club, you're gonna get drunk. If you get drunk, you're gonna meet a girl. If you meet a girl, then you're gonna dance with her, and then you're gonna end up cheating on me. You going out to the club and you potentially getting drunk does not automatically assume that you're going to cheat on your girl at the end of the night. You could just go out, have drinks with your friends, come back home, and there was no transgressions, there was no type of disrespect, there was no type of betrayal that occurred. And yet they try to use these slippery slopes to try to deter you away from doing certain things or for different type of arguments and whatnot. There's a plethora of them, and maybe we can go into depth in a future video of different ones, and I can really start bringing examples of what it looks like in different examples and settings. So, next one is a circular argument. Circular arguments occur when a person's argument repeats what they already assumed before arriving at a new conclusion. For example, if someone says, according to my brain is reliable, that's a circular argument. Circular arguments often use a claim as both a premise and a conclusion. This fallacy only appears to be an argument when in fact it's just restating one's assumptions. Now let's look at the examples real quick and see if we can find out which is which. So example one, smoking pot is against the law because it's wrong. I know it's wrong because it's against the law. And example two, smoking pot is against the law. This leads many to believe it is wrong. Now the circular argument is going to be number one because it's using the circular uh, fact of smoking smoking pot is illegal. And so because something is legal, it means it's wrong. This implies that our justice system is completely 100% moral and that everything that is against the law is wrong. But if you have any type of understanding, you know that laws can change, laws can be amended, things can change, society can change. Now, weed is legal in California. So does that mean that smoking weed is right? Or does that mean that it was it wrong before but it's right now, or does that just mean that there's laws in place that we follow and that there's no necessarily moral compass dictating on what side of the pendulum that it sits on, but that's the way that society has for the different reasons that kind of fall into it, whether that's financial, cultural, um, and also the context of when these laws were established. There's a lot of laws that were established in a different time with a different mindset and different people at time. At a certain point, slavery was legal. Does that mean that slavery is right because it was legal? That's circular. That's a circular argument, and that. And two, it just goes back and forth, and basically saying because I think this, I'm going to create or come up with some type of information to make it so that it makes sense to me and that it can't be argued. You can't really argue with smoking pot is against the law because it's wrong. I know it's wrong because it's against the law because it's using the fact that it's against the law as the anchor and to say that it's wrong. But you'd have to have a deeper understanding of the judicial system and laws and how that goes for you to even contest that. So that's an example of a circular argument. A hasty general blah, 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 I can't talk. A hasty generalization is a claim based on a few examples rather than a substantial proof. Arguments based on hasty generalizations often don't hold up to a lack of supporting evidence. The claim might be true in one case, but that doesn't mean it's always true. Now, what's a hasty generalization? I can't talk. What's a hasty generalization that we come across on Twitter every day? Every day on Twitter, we come onto the app and we see women talk about men ain't shit. We see men talking about women ain't shit because of the experiences that they might have had. These are what you call hasty generalizations. They're taking anecdotal evidence, they're taking bits and pieces and things that they see and using that to define and using that to generalize an entire group of people. Hasty generalizations are common in arguments because there's a wide range of what's acceptable for sufficient evidence. The rules for evidence can change based on the claim you're making and the environment where you are making it, whether it's rooted in philosophy, the sciences, a political debate, or discussing house rules for use in the kitchen. So, which of the following is a hasty generalization? So, example one, some people vote without seriously weighing the merits of the candidate. And example number two, people nowadays only vote with their emotions instead of their brain. Now, a hasty generalization would be people nowadays only vote with their emotions instead of their brains. We don't know who's voting with what. We could say that, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people that do vote with their emotions, but there's also a subsection, there's a percentage of people out there that make logical decisions, are well informed voters. So for you to say people nowadays only vote with their emotions instead of their brains is incorrect because of the fact that there's exceptions to a rule. And you see this so many times in Twitter arguments, or they're just talking about an entire group of people in mass and acting like they're a monolith and that they all act the same way. And when they say like men are trash, or men nowadays don't like to pay for meals, or men nowadays are cheap, or men nowadays are they don't hold their friends accountable and things like that. And they'll use examples of maybe a celebrity incident, or they're using an anecdote of something that gives evidence to it. So to not say that it's wrong, like because you've experienced that, you've gone through it, but that's not the case for everyone. And there's also exceptions, there's also outliers, there's also things that directly go in contrast to what you're claiming. So a hasty generalization doesn't paint the picture, it's not well informed. As you can see, most of these logical fallacies are using different facilities and different criteria to kind of in a roundabout way say a whole lot of nothing, and it's not backed up, and it's not. All of it can always be taken down with facts and with evidence, but when it's happening in real time, if you don't understand and perceive what's being used against you, sometimes you can fall into it. Sometimes you can really get enthralled with dealing with this logical fantasy, blah, 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 logical fallacy. Can't talk. And get caught up and lost in the sauce, and now you're over here having a circular argument in which you're arguing the same thing over and over and over again because it's something that can't even really be effectively argued in the first place. So let's go on to the next one. A red herring. A red herring is an argument that uses confusion or distraction to shift attention away from a topic and towards a false conclusion. Red herrings usually contain an unimportant fact, idea, or an event that has little relevance to the real issue. Red herrings are a common diversionary tactic when someone wants to shift the focus of an argument to something easier or safe to address. But red herrings can also be unintentional. So let's see which of the examples is a red herring. So, example one, my roommate wants to talk about cleaning out the garage. So I asked her what she wants to do with our patio furniture. Now she's shopping for new patio furniture and not asking me about the garage. Example two, my wife wants to talk about cleaning out the garage. So I asked her what she wants to do with the patio furniture because it's just sitting in the garage taking up space. So the logical fallacy in the red herring is going to be example one because your roommate is using the patio furniture as the diversion. That's the red herring. They're saying, oh, now I'm going to go shop for patio furniture. But we're talking about cleaning out the garage. You understand how something like this is so subtle, how something like this is just thrown out there, and you wouldn't even detect that it's happening in real time unless you knew that, hey, this is a red herring. Stop that. Stop talking about patio furniture. Now is not the time to go shopping for patio furniture. We're talking about cleaning out the garage. Let's clean out the garage. They'll do this so many times in which you'll be having an argument about something, and they'll just take one little detail to offset it, and now you're talking about something completely different to the point where you're forgetting about what the entire point of the argument was even about in the first place, or the discussion was about in the first place, because of the fact that they threw you off of that red herring. So always be on the lookout for that when people are discussing things, when people are having arguments with you. If they start to go on detour and let's say we're having a discussion about dating, and you say that, yeah, I don't want to spend a bunch of money on a first date. I usually like to go out for drinks at a bar or at a coffee shop. And then they start talking about the types of bars to take a girl out to. The bar can't be too cheap or blah, 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 blah. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the types of locations that I want to go to. We don't need to go into the specifics of the exact bar and the price range of the bar, the price range of the coffee shop. That's not the argument at hand. That's something in which they will try to detour and throw you off your game. Next one is appeal to hypocrisy. An appeal to hypocrisy, also known as the Tukake fallacy, focus on the hypocrisy of an opponent. The Tukake, I hope I'm saying that right. Fallacy deflects criticism away from oneself by accusing the other person of the same problem or something comparable. The tukake, I don't know if I'm saying this right. Fallacy is an example, is an attempt to divert blame. The fallacy usually occurs when the arguer usually uses apparent hypocrisy to neutralize criticism and distract from the issue. So the first example is, but Dad, I know you smoked when you were my age, so how can you tell me not to do it? Versus the second one is, son, yes, I smoked when I was your age. It was dumb then, and it's dumb now. That's why I forbid you to smoke, chew, vape, use a nicotine gun, or do whatever you kids do with tobacco these days. So, appeal to hypocrisy is basically when someone's trying to bring out your faults in an argument instead of acknowledging and addressing whatever you've already called out for them. When I was in a toxic relationship, this ended up occurring in the manner of I would bring up something to my girlfriend that I didn't like or that she did. Maybe I felt disrespected. Maybe I felt it was inappropriate. Maybe I felt that whatever it was that she had, like her behavior, wasn't something that I appreciated, wasn't something that I liked, and I brought it up to her. And instead of her addressing it, instead of her just apologizing and saying, "Oh, my fault. I'll try to do better in the future to not do that," she would bring up something from 5 months ago that I had did that we had already discussed about, that had already been addressed, that had already been resolved, and then bring it up again and say, "Well, you did this back then," as a point to deflect the blame from her and deflect the accountability for her to have to actually own up to the fact that she messed up. All she would have to do is bring up a time in which I messed up and then just use that as an argument. Now we're having a completely different argument about, now I'm on the defensive because she's coming at me for something that I've already done. But I've already apologized and I've already taken accountability and I've already moved forward from that. That's what a lot of times toxic relationships look like. So if you're ever in a relationship and you're bringing up something to your significant other in which they don't like or you feel like they disrespected you, whether it's um, like, hey, I don't appreciate you texting all these different type of people. Hey, I don't appreciate you taking certain type of pictures. Or hey, when I text you or when I message you, I'd like to be responded to in a prompt manner in a prompt time. And then they bring up, oh, well, you didn't answer my phone calls all day 2 months ago, and then you explain to them, well, I was at the gym, I was in the hospital, I was unconscious. There was some reason in which that I didn't answer your calls, but I addressed it. I explained myself to you, and we move forward from that. And instead of them saying, "Oh, okay, that's my fault as well," I'm going to now correct my behavior. They're bringing up that old incident that you already went through. That's the appeal to hypocrisy. To saying, "I don't need to change. I don't need to take blame. You've done something before. You're at fault as well. You're not perfect." So always be on the lookout for these type of things. I'm gonna cut the video here and just see how it does. See if this is something that people want. If you guys like the video, if you were interested by it, or if this is something that you want to see more of, like and comment down at the bottom in the comment section, and we can go over another video in the future. I can really sit down and come up with some really good examples. Or you can also just go onto the website right here and look at the article for yourself. I'll probably put the link in there as well so that you can just go and look at the article if you don't necessarily want to watch another video about it. But without further ado, that's the video. This is your boy Dad Poppy, and I'm signing out.